X Connect, Third Ocean. My name is Karim Kanji. Thanks for joining us. We are here with Matt Hartley, editor of the Financial Post Tech Desk.
That's the title.
That's correct. Excellent. Well, congratulations. That's like a new title this year?
Yeah, newish, yeah. The about halfway through the summertime. So yeah, no, it's been fun so far.
Good, good. Well, we're going to do a year review.
Cool.
2011 has been eventful, to say the least.
Say that.
So why don't we start off with probably the biggest news in tech this year, I think, and that was the passing of Steve Jobs.
Sure.
You know, a lot of people have a lot of things to say when he was alive, and especially now that he's passed. A book came out on his life soon after he passed. You know, what are your thoughts on his impact in technology?
Well, I mean, his impact on tech, just in general, is, I mean, it's fairly self-explanatory, right? I mean, he's a guy who came into Apple at a time when the company was, you know, politely speaking, in the tank.
Yeah.
Rescued the company and then reordered a number of businesses. There's a lot of talk now about legacy for Steve Jobs, right? Was he the greatest inventor of our time? Does he belong on the you know, the list with the Thomas Edisons and the Henry Fords of the world? And I'm not really sure that inventor is the word for Steve Jobs. He does have a number of patents to his name, and he did do some inventing.
Yeah.
But more than anything else, he was an innovator, and he was a guy who, he was a problem solver. So he would look at pain points in products and fix those pain points. I mean, there were MP3 players before the iPod, but nobody came up with a way to marry the software with the music store, with the sort of elegant consumer product the way he did. Ditto for the iPhone. There'd never been a device that married the web with a phone the way he did. And so, you know, that was his real skill, was taking something, fixing the product, and then, or fixing the problems with the product, and then reselling it to consumers and you know, making it simple and easy to use. He took a lot of the guesswork out of technology, and I think that's one of the reasons a lot of people really felt a connection with him, was that he solved problems for them, things that didn't work before. They could now access music on the go, they could watch movies on you know, a screen anywhere they were on a plane.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably what's you know, the lasting legacy of Steve Jobs. And of course, with his death this year, I mean, it was you know, there was the outpouring of grief and support, and you know, Apple won't be the same, but it's going to be a long time. The sort of the shadow of Steve Jobs will loom large over that company for a while, I'm sure.
The products that continue to come out will be heavily influenced by what he's done.
Oh, sure, and I mean, I'm sure in the research labs and Apple, there's all kinds of product blueprints that have his fingerprints all over them. So we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, there's a lot of speculation that Apple could be working on a TV, you know, a flat screen. Which seems like a logical step. So we'll have to wait and see kind of what Apple has up its sleeve. But you know, Tim Cook is a really capable manager, and he still has a great team in place there with Jonathan Ive and Phil Schiller and those kinds of guys. So you know, I don't think Apple's in trouble. I think it's a company that's going to be just fine. But at the same time, you know, that they have lost that sort of chief marketer, that guy that was the face of the company, and there just isn't anybody else in the tech world that's anything like him on an iconic level like that.
Yeah, it's fair. I don't know if you had a chance to read the book, or...
I'm about halfway through it. I haven't quite finished it yet.
Okay, so you're a little bit ahead than I am, and so far from what I've read, it seemed that he was literally the visionary, and this was his I guess his first trip with Apple, starting the company and growing it to a $1 billion company, and it seems that he was a visionary in terms of building the type of products that he believed the consumers wanted. And I don't know whether or not there's anyone there at Apple that is a visionary in that sense, in terms of we need to, I'm sure, you know, the iPhone will go through its iterations and become better and more sexier, and the must-have gadget that all the cool kids want. But I don't know if there's going to be another product that Apple will develop that is not out there yet.
Yeah.
That Apple's going to produce. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I actually wrote a column about this a few months ago, and shortly after Steve Jobs died, and I said that Apple will be fine for 3, 5, 7, 10 years. Like you said, the iPhone, there'll be new iterations of the iPhone, there'll be new iPods, new MacBooks. You know, all of those devices will continue along, and they'll get upgrades. There'll be new technologies that'll be you know, added into them, and they will improve. The real question about Apple is, what's that next thing?
Yeah.
Right. You know, when Steve Jobs came back, Apple only sold computers. That was really all they did. Then they added an iPod, and then they added an iPhone, and then they added an iPad. So now you've got this broad line of sort of consumer electronics, but you have to wonder what that next piece of that puzzle becomes. And I think if it is a television, that's great. It sounds as though Steve was working on that before he died. So if the television gets added to the mix, then the question becomes, what's that next piece beyond that? And I think that's what a lot of observers, Apple watchers, and the markets themselves are going to be looking at to sort of see how does Apple innovate beyond the sort of the foundation that Jobs has laid out for them.
Yeah, it should be an interesting time to watch.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
It's a fascinating company to cover. I mean, beyond the human element of Steve Jobs' passing, it was a real tragedy for reporters because he was such a great character to write about. He was always, saying controversial things, which just made for great stories.
Sure.
And so it would be great if someone else in the tech world could step up and sort of perform that role.
Yeah, if a lot of people say he innovated and he impacted a number of different, not just technologies but industries. Music and film as well. If you were to pick one where he's had the biggest impact and maybe one that'll have the most lasting impact, what would you figure it would be?
That's a really good question. I think probably the one where where he has had the most profound impact to date would be music. Okay. iTunes has completely reordered the landscape. I remember when I was a kid, I used to go to, you go to the corner store, I pick up Rolling Stone magazine, and in the back you'd have the Billboard charts, right? And it would show the top albums of the week and whatever. Now, when you go pick up Rolling Stone, the last time I saw the charts in the back, it's got like the iTunes top 10, right? And making it to the top of iTunes is now more important than almost anything else.
Yeah.
Physical record stores are going away. I mean, we're here on Yonge Street in Toronto, and just up the street there used to be a Sam the Record Man that's just not there anymore. And I mean, that wasn't entirely Apple. I mean, Napster and the download craze obviously played a role in that. But the ability to download music quickly and cheaply over the internet, I think, is probably, and the way that Jobs sort of reordered the business as well by imposing his own will sort of on the record companies, I think is where the most profound impact has been. In terms of going forward, I think video might be where Apple could have a lasting impact. Right now, there's a lot of people that are going through iTunes to get TV shows and movies and things like that.
Sure.
But they're not significantly cheaper, and it's not significantly more convenient than other offerings on the market. I think if Apple can reorder its thinking in this respect, and I don't know if that comes with a new product like a television or a new pricing structure or putting pressure on studios to drop the price of certain things or creating an all-you-can-eat model. But I think in video and in the film business, I think Apple can still have a pretty profound impact. There's just such a huge user base, and there's such a cool factor there that I think Hollywood really wants to. I think there's an impetus there for Hollywood to kind of figure out how to work with Apple and to create kind of a new paradigm for film.
Yeah. A slight change now in the conversation. A lot of people, when you tell them smartphone, they'll say iPhone.
Sure.
But really, the smartphone inventors is right up here November the 49th.
Yes.
In BlackBerry. And this year has been an interesting year for BlackBerry, like it was for Apple, but for totally different reasons.
Yeah.
Whether it be the lack of success of the playbook, or whether it be their handheld devices and whether they're good or not, or game changers, ownership, what's going on there, management issues. If you had to characterize what kind of year RIM has had, what kind of year did they have?
It's a year that I think they'd like to forget more than anything else. It's tough. RIM was, it still is the sort of Canada's, I mean, they're still Canada's biggest tech company. They still have a lot of great products that are coming out. But when you think of this, I mean, towards the end of the year, it's becoming ridiculous where every week it seems like there's something new that's going out. There's an earnings warning, or executives are getting thrown off a plane, or there's layoffs, or devices are late, or software's late. And it seems to be one problem after another. And, I think a lot of it started with the playbook. The playbook, although a solid device from a hardware perspective, has been plagued by issues from the beginning. There's still features that are missing, even though the device was launched in April. We're still waiting on this Playbook 2.0 software that's not coming out until the beginning of 2012. And I think you can probably look at the Playbook as a giant distraction for RIM. You know, when Apple brought out the iPad in 2010, there was a real rush in the market that everybody was like, okay, what's going to be our iPad killer? How are we going to counter this? And, you know, RIM came out with this Playbook and they showed it off at DevCon in September 2010, and everyone was like, okay, great. So they've got this Playbook, it's coming out, and then it didn't come out for another 7 months.
Yeah.
And, or at least 6.5. And so now you've got this situation where in the time between RIM announced the Playbook and when it actually launched, Apple brought out a new iPad with all kinds of new features. And, you know, I have a Playbook and I like it. It's a good device, but there's a real lack of applications for it, which is a real red flag for any tablet, right? Anybody wants to pick one up for Christmas or whatever. You know, so that's a big problem. And then, you know, all of the time that was spent in building it, and marketing it, and the hope that was placed into it, you know, now and then you got into a situation where RIM hadn't really launched a brand new device in almost a year as of August. The new devices are great. I carry around a BlackBerry Bold 9900 and I love it. It's a great device. But the number of people who walk around saying that, it's shrinking, right?
Yeah, one of a few.
And so I think this is a company that nobody's really questioning RIM's technology. The technology is secure.
Yeah.
The software maybe takes a little bit too long to get to market, and I think some people would like to see this software transition to the BBX or BB10 or whatever they're going to call it next year. I think they'd like to see that sped up a little bit. But I think the real problem here is one of execution, and that's why you had those management troubles earlier in the year. You had anonymous executives writing open letters saying that the management needed a change. You've got activist shareholders taking an interest in the company and thinking about whether or not they need to make a change, and whether or not Jim Balsillie and Mike Lazaridis should be co-CEO and co-chairman of the board. I mean, there's still a lot of questions around this company. Yeah. And I think the first 6 months of 2012 are going to be really telling. If the Playbook 2.0 software is late or does not impress when it arrives, if Playbook sales continue to be bad, and if the this transition to BBX, BB10 does not go smoothly, and there aren't sort of cool devices to go with it, if all of those things don't happen, then I think we're right back where we started. And by the time the AGM rolls around next summer, I think you could be looking at a real shareholder shakeup, and I think there could be a revolt. But if all of those things happen, if Playbook 2.0 comes out and it's awesome, and the Playbook picks up sales, and the new BlackBerries are awesome, we could be talking about a very, very different year for RIM next year. I mean, there's reason for optimism. There's still a lot of BlackBerries being sold. It's just a matter of whether or not they can execute on those strategies.
What impact do you think developers and applications within the BlackBerry environment have on the ability for them to sell their product?
It's a really good question, and I don't think anybody has actually quite figured out specifically the role that applications play when you go to buy something, because there's a bunch of competing factors here, right? The first one is you've got to have at least a base of applications. You got to have a good Twitter client, you got to have a Facebook app, the things that when everybody fires up their smartphone, the 5 or 6 apps that they want to buy. And so RIM has a lot of those base applications, the Score Mobile, the Foursquares, the Facebooks, those kinds of things. Those are all good applications. Where RIM fails or is falling behind is with the number of applications. So there's 46,000 BlackBerry applications. There's almost 600,000 iPhone applications. Yeah. So just from a purely from a numbers game, they're losing. But then you have to ask the question, okay, does the numbers game really matter? Do you need 600,000 applications? I don't need 900 solitaire apps or 300 fart applications or whatever. You don't need those things. Yeah. RIM contends that they are the second most profitable platform for developers. And they contend that, I think one of the stats that I saw from the Yankee Group was that 15% of BlackBerry applications are actually paid for, and that BlackBerry application developers, the apps actually sell for a higher average price than on other platforms. So that's a good money-making, proposition for a developer. At the same time, though, if the ecosystem is seen to be in crisis, and if the market share is dwindling, even if total device sales are going up, is that a wagon that you want to hitch yourself to?
Yeah.
I think a lot of developers are going to wait and see what this VBX, VB10 platform looks like next year before they decide if they want to go back to BlackBerry or if they want to continue with BlackBerry. So again, it all comes back to execution. I think next year is going to be really telling to see exactly what the future of this company is going to look like.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see what happens, and for no other reason than they're a Canadian company, their huge valuation, big impact on the Toronto Stock Exchange, and whether you like
yours and mine's are RSPs.
Absolutely, right. So I want them to do well because it impacts whether I like their device or not.
And I think that's a Canadian attitude. I think we all want RIM to succeed. I think if you went up to anybody in the Canadian technology community, even if they're an iPhone carrier or a quote unquote Mac fanboy, like if you asked them, you said, given the choice of RIM succeeding or RIM failing, which would you prefer?
Yeah.
Just about every one of them is going to be like, yeah, of course we want a great technology champion right down the road in Waterloo. Who wouldn't?
True, that is so true. Staying here in Canada, a couple things to end off. First off, there's been a lot of Canadian, even Toronto-based, more specifically, tech companies coming up and making some noise. I don't know if you have any favorites.
Now you're trying to get me in trouble. You're trying to put me on the spot, get me in trouble. You know what? There are a lot of very cool Canadian companies that are doing some interesting things. One of the ones that there's a whole bunch. I mean, you can talk about Polar Mobile, you can talk about N-Loop, you can talk about Keek, you can talk about the list goes on and on and on. Like there's so many different Canadian startups that are doing innovative things. I think some of the most amazing ones are the ones that you almost don't even hear about until you see them on TechCrunch that Google has bought them for a certain amount of money. I mean, BumpTop, for example, right?
Yeah.
That was a great technology that, we'd heard a little bit about and we'd seen a bit about it, and then all of a sudden Google comes out of nowhere and picks it up. I think Fixmo is an amazing company. Rick Siegel's involved there, and they've got some pretty amazing products that are being used by some pretty high-profile people. No, I think it remains to be seen exactly how what kind of a role we're going to play, because I think a lot of these companies that we're starting to build are getting to the point now where, you've seen some big exits this year, right? Like Radian 6 was sold to Salesforce.com, and a bunch of others. Google's picked up a bunch of companies. I think Google spent almost $150 million on Canadian startups over the past 2 years. So we have to decide in this country if we're going to continue to work with these entrepreneurs and help them build big companies and keep them here, or if we're just going to be sort of a feeding ground for, or a seeding ground even for bigger tech companies, and whether or not the Googles and the Facebooks and the Microsofts of the world are going to come in, see these great companies that we're building in Waterloo and Toronto and Montreal, and just start buying them up. Because there's a lot of great talent here, and there's a lot of great entrepreneurs building cool things. It's just a matter of whether they can go take that jump from being a startup to being a viable company long term.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you have a preference on, would you rather have a Google or a Microsoft, pull out companies, Canadian-based companies, or would you rather see a company grow big and prosper locally?
Well, I think there's room for both, and I think both are good for the ecosystem. Google, when they acquire a company, quite often they bring the guys down to Mountain View and they'll work them into the Google system and the whole thing. But a lot of times the guys end up working out of the Waterloo office, right? Because that's where a lot of innovation is happening as well. And I know that the guys at Google Waterloo are very good at attracting Canadian talent, signing new guys up, and sort of flagging cool startups for the kind of the mothership down in Silicon Valley. So I think there's a room for that, right? Where you've got money coming in, entrepreneurs are cashing out, getting a lot of money, and then they can use that money to go bankroll a new startup, right? At the same time, though, I think it's important that we build companies that can kind of stand on their own 2 feet here. I think it's important for the digital economy here. I think it's important for sponsoring and mentorship for young entrepreneurs. And I think you're starting to see a little bit of both. And I think the fact that Google has doubled down in Waterloo, and now we're hearing all these rumors about Facebook possibly opening a Kitchener office, which is completely unconfirmed, but it seems logical that if you're a big Silicon Valley company, why wouldn't you have a Waterloo outpost? Why wouldn't you have some guys in Toronto scouting and checking out what's going on in the local communities, if not just for networking, but for actually acquisitions?
Absolutely. Recent news about the Privacy Commissioner in Canada talking about advertising online. And it was a big announcement, but I'm not sure a lot of Canadians really understand the impact of it or really what it means. I'm wondering if you can kind of, in simple English, tell us,
Sure.
what was the announcement, and what does it mean for, people like myself using Googling and going on Facebook and that sort of stuff, and then what does it mean for marketers?
That's a really good question. So the announcement in question is Jennifer Stoddart, the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, brought out some new guidelines for what she calls behavioral advertising online. And so essentially what this is it's these are new guidelines for marketers that she recommends marketers follow, so that Canadians know what companies know about them. And she wants it so that if you're a Canadian and you're going on the internet and you want to use services, whether it's Google or Facebook or whatever, that you should be able to opt out of the advertising and the tracking technologies and things like that. And this is a movement that's been getting a lot of traction in the United States with the sort of the do not track legislation. So the thing is that when you go to Google and you punch in, Toronto, or you punch in cars, right? You punch in cars, Toronto, and you're going to get a list of car dealerships, but you're also going to get advertisements for car dealerships in Toronto. And that's how Google makes its money. When you click on one of those advertisements and it takes you to a car dealership website, the car dealership pays Google, and that's how Google makes $23 billion a year. So what happens though is that there's little bits of information that end up on your computer. Google ends up logging a lot of that. They end up logging the time that you did the search, what day it was, what searches you did before and after, what your IP address is to give you an idea of where you are. And all of that data is anonymized, and then it's recorded within Google's vast server farms. And all of those things the company uses to improve its search, to improve its advertising and all that kind of stuff, which is exactly what you'd expect Google to do. But there's some concern that certain companies may take this too far. And so instead of just installing a simple cookie on your computer that relays information about one website, there's some concern about what are called super cookies, which actually end up tracking your movements across various websites, which can not only tell the company what you're doing, but also what you're doing on their competitors' websites. And so there's all kinds of implications for that. So what Ms. Stoddart wants is, I think she's looking for transparency more than anything else. And this is something that she's been pushing for in a lot of other areas as well, most notably with the Facebook investigation that she did last year. She wants it so that Canadians know what's being recorded and that they can opt out of that. Now, there's going to be some pushback from the marketing side, because the reason Google's as valuable as it is because it can serve good advertisement. And the reason it can serve those advertisements is because it can learn things about users in a general sense. If it can't learn those things, it can't get better and it can't serve those ads. And Google can't operate. So the question then becomes, Google as a company, as a private entity, offers a service, and the terms of the service are that when you punch something into Google, it tracks certain information. It's just like with Facebook, right? In order to use Facebook, you have to give it certain personal information, and that personal information is anonymized and used in certain ways to serve you ads. And that's the trade-off. In our digital world, that seems to be the trade-off in this entire social networking world. We give you personal information, you give us the service. And there may be some pushback if that business model is going to change. And so it remains to be seen what the fallout of this will be. And the last thing I'll just say about this is that at the center of what Ms. Stoddart is talking about are children. And so what she really is after is she wants to make sure that on children's websites, because no one knows what kids are doing online all the time. You don't know where they go. But if they're going to a Lego site or Thomas the Tank Engine or a Disney site, something that's a child-focused brand, that those kinds of sites should not be tracking children, should not be recording that kind of information. And that's a central tenet of what she was talking about.
Interesting. And so do you think that the Facebooks and the Googles of this world are going to pay attention and take it very seriously? Or is this, what is the government of Canada really going to do to us? How can they shut a $1 billion company down?
Well, that's the thing. Ms. Stoddart carries a pretty big stick. She makes a lot of noise. It was an investigation by her office that, led to sweeping changes at Facebook that affected not just the 18 million Canadian users, but 700 million users around the world. So, I think they're obviously going to listen, but at the same time, these companies have taken steps to make what they do more transparent. So a lot of people don't know this, but you can actually go to Google and find out what the company knows about you. So you can go to the dashboard, it's called Google Dashboard, and in it, it'll tell you, this is your name, this is where you live, this is the personal information that you've shared with these social networks and that kind of thing. You can go to ads preferences, and you can actually remove certain categories of ads that you don't want to see. So for example, if you were going to propose to your girlfriend, and you did a bunch of sites on searches for jewelry sites, but you didn't want jewelry ads to show up in your search results after that, or while your girlfriend's searching on your computer to do something else, you can actually go into the ads preferences and turn off jewelry sites so that those things aren't popping up. So there are things that these companies are doing that allow Canadians to opt out and at least try to make it more transparent. The question is that going to be enough for the Privacy Commissioner? And if it's not, what's the next step look like?
So last question for you, Matt.
Sure.
2012. We talked about RIM in what the first 6 months of 2012 should look for them.
Yeah.
But 2012, what are you looking forward to in the technology realm?
Well, I think RIM for Canadians is going to continue to be the big story. I think whether or not this is a company that's on its way out or if it's a company that's on the comeback trail is going to be the dominant story for Canada. I think some other big things to watch are going to be, Twitter has been doing some really interesting things from a corporate side. They've hired a lot of people. It looks like they're, gearing up to make some big moves, so I think there could be something happening there. And then, probably what could prove to be the biggest tech story of 2012 is there's a good chance that Facebook's going to go public at some point over the course of the year. And I don't think there's been this much excitement about a company going public since Google in 2004. So that'll be a pretty amazing thing to watch. And when that IPO comes out and everybody gets a chance to read the prospectus, I think that's going to be a pretty revealing document as well. So that could happen as early as the spring. And I think that's one that everybody's going to be watching.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it.
No, it was great.
If people want to connect with you online, or if you don't want them to connect with you, where can they find you, or where should
Sure, they should go to fptechdesk.com. That's the website for the Financial Post tech section. Or they can find me on Twitter at the Hartley.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you.